Hey folks, Palmer Toms, DawgsHQ team beat reporter here, joined today by Jake Thompson of OM Spirit. We're talking a little Georgia Ole Miss crossover edition in the On3 network. Jake, first of all, really appreciate you joining us, and exciting matchup. What have the vibes been like, on y'all's side of things as the Rebels ranked ninth in the country prepare for this game against Georgia, who comes in at number 2?
Yeah, it's number 2, number 9. I mean, almost hadn't been this high in the rankings since maybe a couple years ago when they were flirting with top 10 and ended up in the Sugar Bowl. But getting that Texas A&M win Saturday, I think, has made it's a little more stress free, if that even sounds like it makes sense. I mean, Kiffin has thrown out the house money. Kind of play and lose, nothing to lose. And honestly, he's right. If you just kind of look at how the bowl projections and everything kind of past this weekend looks, this doesn't hurt Ole Miss much at all, in the least. The best thing for them is, if you get the win, you pull it off, that's great, but try not, come out unscathed, keep everybody as healthy as possible, and you've still got 2 more games to go to get to a second 10-win season in 3 years. So everybody's excited. It's weird. It's not like that cautious, anxious Ole Miss fan where, we got to have this win, building it up. It's been like a steady, exciting week, and it's kind of a fresh feeling within this fan base and even within the program.
Yeah, how do you think that affects the team? Knowing that, look, Ole Miss has a chance to win the West, but it's out of their control at this point, and they need some help from Alabama. And by the time that this game is played, there's a chance that the West is clinched if the Crimson Tide beat Kentucky as we would all expect. And kind of the same thing for Georgia. Georgia, has a chance to win the East here, and could have the East clinched before this game is even played. Tennessee is the Ole Miss of the East here in this scenario, because the Vols have a small chance to still be alive in the race for the Eastern Division and that spot in Atlanta. But they take on Missouri earlier in the day, 3:30 CBS in Columbia. And if the Tigers win that one and the Vols lose, Georgia's got it clinched. So, from the Ole Miss side of things, how do you feel like that affects the team? You've heard Kiffin use the term house money. Do you think that that's something that can maybe play in their favor, where they're not so tight coming into this game and maybe they play a little bit more loose?
The players we got Monday and yesterday after practices, they were kind of like, no, I mean, we want to win it. I mean, that's our goal, but they haven't felt, maybe they're looser at practice and it's, they're more focused and dialed in, but it feels like that mentality hasn't trickled down to the locker room to the point where Kiffin's treating it like, if we take the loss, you're still sitting at 8 wins, chance to get, everything's still in front of you in terms of a successful season. And, it's just how the divisions are, which it all gets eliminated after the year. But, one loss in the East, one loss in the West to an Alabama or a Georgia, it's uphill the rest of the way, especially if those teams that beat you schedule plays more into their favor. You're not going to get them to lose twice. So, I mean, it's one of those where I think Atlanta's not on their own, kind of on their focus, on their vision board anymore, I don't think. And also, it may not hurt Ole Miss to miss Atlanta if Alabama clinches and somehow Ole Miss gets the win tomorrow night, but Georgia secures it, the trip to Atlanta the next week or whenever it is, and Georgia beats Alabama. So, I mean, it may not be the worst thing if Ole Miss doesn't have to take that trip. If you're looking at the successful big picture and what college football playoff rankings may look like if Ole Miss somehow got the win. But, they know this is a big week, but it does feel different from the Alabama week. And, that's something Kiffin even said during today's teleconference. That it's different than playing tight and playing anxious ahead of Alabama. You felt like you had the shot. Everybody kind of built you up. Is Alabama gettable? And we know what happened in Tuscaloosa this week. He's right. I mean, and nobody favors them. They're double-digit favorites. It's come down a little bit since last night, but still in double digits in the spread. And everybody just assumes Georgia will get it. It's probably going to be a closer and an exciting game. It's not going to be a steamroll. I don't think it'll be the Florida-Georgia game a couple weeks ago. But I do think it's going to, it feels like Georgia is going to get it, take care of business. It's just what does Ole Miss have up their sleeve to maybe pull an exciting outcome out of it. But no, it's just kind of like you're playing and I don't mean this derogatory in any way, but like a Mercer or a Georgia Tech. It's just been eerily calm throughout the week. Like it's just another game on Saturday, and everybody outside that building knows it's anything but.
Yeah, and that's certainly interesting to hear. Like you said, this is an Ole Miss team that has the potential to make things exciting. So some exciting players on both sides of the ball. Let's dive into who the Rebels have got, and how they could potentially give Georgia a run for its money here. I think with the conversation, look, it's the case in football these days, and especially with a team like Ole Miss, all the conversation starts at the quarterback position in Jackson Dart. And so, Jake, what have you seen from Jackson this year as he's, in his second season as a starter for the Rebels? And, how have you seen him progress from the player that he was in 2022 to one in 2023 that when we were talking in the offseason, there was a little bit of concern and maybe question, about whether he'd even be the guy. They brought in Spencer Sanders and they brought in Walker Howard, both from the transfer portal, both highly touted players. Sanders, somebody that had starting experience, but it has remained Dart that's the guy. What have you seen from him making that jump from 2022 to 2023?
I've seen, the maturity that, and not just, with his play style, but within the playbook, understanding it and grasping it. And that was kind of what Ole Miss fans are wanting to see, is we all saw what Matt Corral did from year 1 to year 2 in a Lane Kiffin system. And there was the expectations of Dart having that same success. But, when looking at it, Dart put up numbers last year that were equal to Corral's second season in the system. So, it was like, what stats may not be what to look at. It was other intangibles that he would make in taking that step. And of course, like you said, second straight season, really third, because I'm sure he had a QB battle, his first year at Southern Cal as well. But, second straight season here that Kiffin goes and gets somebody and has competition in the spring, where you felt coming out of the 2022 season, this was Dart's team. Luke Altmaier was kind of a poorly kept secret that after the bowl game, he was going to take off because he entered the portal after the Egg Bowl, but Art asked him to stay just to finish the thing out with them. But you brought in Spencer Sanders, who is all he's done is start football games at Oklahoma State for 4 years and been successful and been a winner. And we thought, what is this going to do? Because is Spencer going to want to be the guy that ends up being number 2 if that's how it plays out, and be okay with that? And turns out Dart won the competition. Spencer has been, we only talked to him once or twice early in the season, but watched him on the sidelines. He's been involved, been excited. He's been happy with the number 2 spot. And Dart, has taken over as a leader. You've seen what he's done. I think that Tulane game, that second half game for him, where he just kind of willed the offense back to life and got them back into it after Tulane tied it up, and it was looking kind of bad there that second week of the season. He made some long runs on a third and maybe a fourth down as well, and just he's done that all season, put the team on his back and made the plays when he needed to. And that's the kind of stuff that we didn't really see last year. Not that he wasn't engaged, we just didn't see him grabbing the reins in different aspects as he has this season. And it's helped him cut down on interceptions. He's only thrown 6 up to this point. He threw up 11 or so last year, a high number, had bad high interception games, and he hasn't done that yet this year against some really strong defenses in this past month. And that's where I think he's turned the corner. And of course, we're putting the cart way in front of the horse here, but after this next month or so and bowl season wraps up, there may be a conversation that he has to have depending on what the NFL draft looks like for him. Quarterbacks are heavy this year, so there's potential for him to come back and get a third year. Some Corral didn't have another year under Kiffin and develop even further, where the 2025 draft is a little more favorable for quarterbacks, especially for him.
Yeah, and that's a discussion that's being had on boards over here with Carson Beck, who's in his first year as a starter. And, looking at the situation with Beck, it has been a slow progression, a slow but steady progression, I would say. And the player that he is in, as we're talking here in November, is not the player that he was in September. And that's not to say that the player he was early in the season was not good. He really has been impressive all the way throughout, but the football that he played in October and the football that he's continuing to play is really putting himself in that kind of a conversation where you are having to think, after 1 year, is this guy really going to be, up and gone, and Georgia's going to be looking to replace a quarterback once again? That remains to be seen. But both of these quarterbacks, certainly have been among the SEC's best, and towards the top of the country in all the statistical categories. And these teams put pressure on them. These offensive minded coaches, laying on the Ole Miss side, and then as you look at Georgia, Mike Bobo, who's back in town running things for the Bulldogs, on in terms of play calling and the offensive side of things, certainly has been a lot of pressure put on, and attention paid to both Dart and Beck here. So as you look at Jackson and the guys that what he's been able to do, it's largely in part because of the guys that he has around him, and it is incredible to me the way that Ole Miss just feels like time and time and time again is producing receivers. And that's something that we saw throughout the 2010s and into the 2020s now. Two players go to the NFL draft, and Malik Heath and Jonathan Mingo. And this year they bring in a crew, and they've got some really good players there as well. Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, Dayton Wade, among the top 3 of the top 11 receivers in the SEC in terms of yardage, all above that 600-yard mark. Each have 3 touchdowns plus on the season. Trey Harris leading the way for the Rebels with 7. And then the rushing attack, obviously, reigning SEC freshman of the year, Quinshon Judkins, and just everything that he's been able to do. 12 touchdowns on the ground, almost 170 attempts so far this season, 793 yards. But then, it's not a one-man show there at that position either. Ulysses Bentley also factoring in there as well to make it a little bit of a 1-2 punch. Not nearly as many attempts for him. And makes sense when you've got a player like Judkins that you don't hand it off to him as much. But, what has stood out to you about the weapons that are around Dart and this Ole Miss offense?
I think getting what they've gotten out of Bentley this year, which is what they were hoping gotten last year when it was, they were hoping for that 3-headed monster, and Bentley, who came from SMU, and Zach Evans, who came from TCU, did pan out that way. Bentley got hurt, kind of just lingered all season, was, did some special team stuff, but just never had that explosiveness in the backfield. But he's been 100% healthy all year, and he's provided a jump start, a spark to the run game, and actually at times looked a little bit faster than Judkins, who dealt with some bruised ribs, hurt ribs from the Tulane game early in the season, and has come on ever since the Alabama game. Has didn't put up yards then, but started looking like himself. And then from that LSU game on to last week, he is kind of returning to form for Ole Miss. But getting Bentley to make those plays and become like that scat back, a Darren Sproles type, can catch it out wide or even just be a handoff, normal traditional running back. He's provided not the need at times for, Judkins can take the spell without them being worried that they're going to lose some momentum if he's made a big run and needs to take a breather for a player or two. And that's what they were hoping to get for 2 years. They're getting it out of this year. That's helped a lot for the run game. And then having that success with both of them has then in turn allowed the passing game, which, it's been a struggle at times. Dart's got weapons, Trey Harris and then Jordan Watkins, both guys who are dealing with in-season injuries. Harris is closer back to 100%. Watkins about 3 weeks or so removed from a broken hand. He suffered in a bye week practice. Just one of those fluke. If it's going to happen, of course, it's going to happen in a bye week where you need to rest the guy. But he's played through it, didn't miss a game. And Dayton Wade, I don't know. I'm sure there is some at every school and in the history of football, but Dayton Wade has been one of those tremendous stories. A walk-on guy. Got him to come from Western Kentucky, and one of those just, what can you do for us? Give us something. And he's turned into almost reliable for Dart at times when Watkins and Harris aren't making the strides they need in games. Dayton Wade has become that playmaker as well. The only disappointment in the passing game is just not having a healthy Zachary Franklin. They got him from, UTSA, big time player there, a lot, big stats guy, and looked like they were going to add a little bit to with Harris to complement after missing out on Keon Coleman in that sweepstakes with Florida State. They thought Franklin would help kind of replace what they lost out on that for this year, and he's just not not had it. He missed the first part of the season, came back a little bit as kind of a decoy guy in the Alabama game. Didn't do much and just has made some catches here and there, but they have not gotten what they wanted to out of him. And, we're hoping that maybe we'll see more out of him this weekend, because at this point it's almost to the point of asking, is he still hurt? Is there something to it? Because it's right. If not, then what kind of player has he been? And that's been the one disappointment in the passing game. But Trey Harris, making himself a lot of money with every catch he's made, especially those against A&M with the one-handed, and the fact they've got a receiver that can win 50-50 balls, because they don't have speed. There's not a lot of separation on vertical deep passes at times for the receivers. So having a guy like Harris where he can make that 50-50 ball 80-20 sometimes, that's a huge lifeline for Dart when trying to just jumpstart it and not having to always rely on slant routes, 3, 4, 5 yard passes to just march down the field like death by a thousand cuts. You can take that big shot, and you got a guy like Harris who's finally coming around after that injury.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Georgia approaches the matchup here. Coming out of that Missouri game, where again, you're looking at a Tigers offense that has a little bit of a 1-2 punch at running back in Cody Schrader and Nathan Pete. And Schrader goes for over 100 yards on the ground. Receiving wise, they've got Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, that three-headed monster there, with a really talented player at the top. It was interesting to see how Georgia approached that matchup. They, gave a little bit of a different look in the secondary, relied very heavily on its corners. Kamari Lassiter, who's the team's top corner, started all 15 games last year outside and has started, the 9 up to this point on the outside as well. They moved him inside and put him in the slot and had him play that all important star position, and relied pretty heavily on him. The guy that he replaced in Tyke Smith leads the team in interceptions and finished with the team lead in tackles on Saturday. So he still found a way to make an impact. Was really interesting to look at, the way that Georgia approached that matchup and wanting to, protect itself on the back end of that defense and, feeling the need to find ways to fine tune its group and give itself advantages in these matchups against those Missouri receivers. I'm very curious to see if they're going to end up doing something similar against Ole Miss. Because for as much as you give up, as much as you're protecting yourself against those deep balls, which you say is not a huge part, in terms of the speed of it. And I think that's where Luther Burden, really all those Missouri receivers, that's where they attack you, is with their speed. Maybe Ole Miss doesn't have that speed, and it's more of the size that concerns you. So maybe you don't feel the need to go to a different look. But also, if you do go to a different look, how are you going to stop the run? Because that is a big part of how Missouri moved the ball, both with Schrader moving it and quarterback Brady Cook running it as well. Georgia gave up some yards on the ground, and I don't know that that's something that you want to do. I don't know that you want to be able going into a game against Ole Miss saying, "Hey, we're cool giving up yards on the ground," because that is with those guys running the ball, Judkins especially. That's probably not the best way to approach that matchup. So going to be really, really, really interested to see how Georgia's defense approaches Ole Miss's offense in this game. As we flip things over and talk about the Ole Miss defense, it's a little bit of a new life there. Pete Golding comes into town as the defensive coordinator after his stint at Alabama. And it's just statistically, it looks like it's been a little bit of up and down. What has your assessment been of Golding as a defensive coordinator and the play of this Rebels defense so far?
It's weird to see, just in recent history and seasons with the Ole Miss defense, but they've gotten better as their SEC games got tougher or more important. I mean, they faced really tough offenses, Alabama, LSU, what KJ Jefferson can do at Arkansas, and Max Johnson had success as well at times, especially in the second half. But this Ole Miss defense has quietly become the second best sack defense in the SEC, with just behind that A&M defensive front, and Ole Miss has got 31, and something that's helped, I think, them be this good, this continuing to get better this late in the season is Pete Golding kind of institutes, like a hockey line change, mass substitution, 2, 3 guys at a time. Snap counts are low for all the guys are balanced, but they're very low. They're in the 40s, maybe in the 50s if they keep a guy out there who's riding a hot hand, something having a good game, but they're not high snap counts. And that's something Jared Ivey said this week is we're a lot more fresh than we were this time last November, or last November at this point in the season. They were just beaten up, a lot of injuries. They were playing almost entire games, most of them, him, JJ Pegues. And this year they're fresher, and they're also just getting to the quarterback. That's, that I think this is the end of the game, and the game that determines it is what does one of the best sack defensive lines in the SEC do against what's probably the best offensive line in terms of protecting Beck, because he's the least sacked quarterback in the SEC. And he had, with just 9 times he's been sacked all season. So that's what's going to give in that battle is what's going to dictate, maybe coach speak and cliche, but the trenches, I think, does dictate this game, the game inside the game.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go. As you look at Ole Miss's scoring defense, giving up 49 to an incredible LSU offense, but they still win that in a shootout. 35 this past Saturday to Texas A&M, and outside of that, it hasn't been above 24. And so, Georgia, if Georgia's scoring, against this Ole Miss defense, they're going to have to beat that pressure. And you talk about Beck being pretty well protected. Well, that was not necessarily the case this past Saturday. They gave up 3 sacks there. So this is an offensive line that has been beat up and banged up, and they've gone through a couple of changes. From their original 5, Xavier Truss, who started the season at left guard, has moved over to right tackle to play for Amarius Mims, who had the tightrope ankle surgery after the South Carolina game. He is back and with the team and going through drills. He has yet to play. He dressed out for the last 2 games, warmed up for this last one with the second team, but did not play. Kirby said that he is continuing to get closer and closer and looks, is feeling more comfortable and feeling more confident and starting to look like his old self again. Does that mean that he's going to be in the starting lineup on Saturday? We'll have to see. And if so, what does Georgia do around him? That's a first round caliber player at right tackle. What are you doing with Truss, who was in the starting lineup and has been the entire season? Are you moving him right back over to left guard where he hasn't played since mid-September? I would assume he's probably getting reps there. Or are you going to ride the guys that have been playing there, Dylan Fairchild, Micah Morris, those guys? So it's going to be interesting to see how Georgia approaches protecting the quarterback. And I think part of that protection is sometimes keeping a tight end in. And, obviously the tight end for Georgia is the big story of this week. And are they going to be able to get Brock Bowers back? As we mentioned, that tightrope ankle surgery for Mims, Bowers had it too. Bowers had it after the Vanderbilt game. And reports have been that he is running again and that he is, hitting speeds on the GPS that I could never dream of. And he's doing it, not at 100%, but what's he going to look like? Is he going to be available? That remains to be seen. And is going to be one of the big storylines on Saturday to watch. There's a lot of them. And so I'll just throw it to you, Jake, here. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A crossover piece as well. So be sure to check that out on both of our sites. But one player that you think Ole Miss has to have play really well, one on offense, one on defense, who is it for you?
I think for offense, I think it's got to be Quinshon Judkins' best game of the season, because I think they need to have something that frees up and makes the Georgia defense have to respect and be, keep them honest in terms of not having to just go back and make Dart throw it because they can't get it, and they know they're not going to have success running it. They need the secondary to not just know, hey, he's going to pass it as much as you can because the run game's not going. Dart, I mean, Judkins has got to have, maybe another 200 yard type game, I think, just for that offense to get on schedule, because contrary to belief, Kiffin offense, you think superstar quarterback, lighting up video game passing numbers week in, week out. And they've really been more of a successful running offense, when he's been here, when they're clicking, when they're going. And so I think that's something they got to have is Quinshawn just playing maybe his best game of his Ole Miss career up to this point. On defense, I think you got to get, I think Jared Ivey's got to have another big game like he did this past weekend. I couldn't name any of them on the defensive line because I think that's where the player of the game will come from if Ole Miss pulls this out, and that's where they'll tip their hat to is those guys. But I think Jared Ivey is, it's J.J. Pegues or Cedric Johnson and Davion Harris, who missed a couple games for concussion protocol, came back, got the lucky hand on the kick, an A&M kick to block it and seal the win. But I think if insert defensive lineman here, an ad lib for that answer, I think that's where the play of players of the game will come.
Yeah, and as you look at it on the Georgia side, I'll start with the defense as well, because there is a little bit of an insert this position here, feel with linebacker, inside linebacker, as Georgia loses one of its best players on the defensive side of the football, and Jamon Dumas-Johnson suffers a broken forearm this past Saturday. When they'll be able to get him back remains to be seen. He is not going to play on this coming Saturday. So for Ole Miss fans, and looking at a run game that the Rebels are going to try to get going, that Georgia hasn't had a ton of success against. They've been susceptible to being beat by the run. You've really got to have strong play from the guys that are replacing Dumas-Johnson, and not just the guys that are replacing him, but I would throw Smile Munden in there as well. He's this team's leading tackler, a starter alongside Dumas-Johnson normally over the last 2 years. They're going to need him to play well, but they're going to need and step up, but then they're going to need some guys that have been part of a rotation to take on a bigger part of that rotation. CJ Allen, Raylan Wilson, 2 freshmen. Xavier Sori is a guy that has been around the program and started a couple games early in the season for Georgia when Munden was dealing with an injury of his own. They need some strong play from the linebackers, and then on the offensive side for Georgia, I'm going to go with Carson Beck as the guy that I'm looking at, because we saw him play last week against Missouri, and it was not his best game. And it might have been his worst game since September. You would throw the Vanderbilt game in there as well, where he had 2 turnovers, an interception and a fumble, and then a near one there on a snap exchange as well. So that was probably his worst game. But in terms of decision making and such, this past Saturday, it just wasn't as crisp. And I think that what is really good about Carson is that he hasn't been a turnover machine as a first year quarterback, and he's been able to avoid those, and he generally makes good decisions. There were a couple times this past week that it didn't feel like the right decision was necessarily made, but to be critiquing a first year starting quarterback that threw for over 250 plus yards and has done so in each of the 9 games, did not turn it over this past Saturday, says a lot about him. So Georgia's going to need him to play well. They're really, you need a quarterback to play well every week, so you could easily circle that guy. But with the way that I didn't feel like he was on his A game last week. With the way that this game could go and facing off against an offensive mind and Lane Kiffin and an offense that has a ton of elite weapons, you might need a quarterback to go, put up those points. And, you certainly need somebody to, play well in a top 10 matchup. So, well, folks, appreciate you tuning in. DawgsHQ, OM Spirit, Jake Thompson, Palmer Toms. Be sure to come check both of us out. And Jake, really appreciate you, joining us today.
I appreciate it coming on. This was fun.